Hey guys, tonight we embark on a rather questionable journey, back to the Middle Ages. Picture this. The rooster hasn't even bothered crowing yet, but you're already awake. Why? Because the combination of your straw mattress, the neighbor's eternally grumbling goat, and the frigid draft slipping through the wooden planks of your house has made sleeping past dawn physically impossible. You open your eyes to the comforting sight of mud on the floor, mud smeared on the walls, mud caked on your tunic. It's not just outside, it is inside. Floors back then were mostly packed earth. If you were lucky, someone tossed down a fresh layer of rushes mixed with herbs last week. If you weren't, well, you've been walking on the same half-composted, flea-riddled floor covering for months. A few beams of sunlight squeeze through the gaps in the wooden shutters. You sit up and immediately regret it. Your back aches in ways you didn't know were possible. Yes, you're 20, but your joints think you're 80. Oh, and remember that soft pillow you fell asleep on last night? Just kidding. Pillows are for the wealthy. Your head rests on a bag of straw or maybe a folded-up, scratchy linen cloth stuffed with old feathers, assuming no rodents made a midnight snack of it. You glance around your one-room home. If you have a family, they're here too. All of them. Spouse, children, and depending on your luck, an aging parent or two. Privacy isn't a thing. Everyone sleeps in the same space, often sharing the warmth of each other and, inevitably, the local wildlife, mostly fleas and lice. Congratulations, you're hosting a full ecosystem. Outside, the smells of smoke, manure, and something vaguely cabbage-like seep through the cracks. Historians still argue whether medieval towns were truly as filthy as later writers claimed, or if that reputation was a bit exaggerated by grumpy Renaissance chroniclers. But from where you're sitting, or rather crouching to avoid hitting your head on the low beams, the evidence feels convincing. You hear your neighbor yelling at his pig again. Free-roaming livestock were common in medieval villages. Pigs, chickens, and the occasional extremely confused goat wandered the streets. And by streets, of course, we mean rutted paths where rainwater, human waste, and leftover stew remnants form small lakes of questionable liquid. Stepping outside, you carefully avoid the low doorway, because medieval door frames are designed to concuss anyone taller than a scarecrow. You breathe in the crisp morning air, which smells roughly like firewood, damp hay, and something uncomfortably close to wet dog. The sky is a pale gray, clouds hanging heavy. Typical. The weather alternates between damp and slightly less damp. Neighbor greets you with a grunt. Friendly fellow. You grunt back. Social norms are refreshingly simple. Survive, and if possible, don't get fined by the local lord for existing incorrectly. There's no time to waste. The day is long and the Middle Ages wait for no one. Plus, the sooner you get started, the sooner you can crawl back into that straw pile tonight and pretend it's comfortable. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your location and what time it is where you are. I love seeing where you guys are listening from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You. Step fully outside, sir, your bare feet sinking slightly into the cold mud, ready to face a medieval morning. For better or much worse. Breakfast. Or more accurately, something vaguely edible you can stomach before collapsing later. Unlike modern mornings with oat milk lattes and smoothie bowls, your choices are limited, very limited. If you're lucky, there's pottage left over from yesterday. A grayish sludge of grains, water, and maybe, just maybe, a sad-looking carrot chunk floating in it. If luck wasn't on your side, well, stale bread it is. But not just any bread. This is medieval bread, made with flour that may contain bits of ground-up millstone thanks to poorly maintained grinders. Yes, you get fiber and minerals, lots of minerals. Dental health, meet your natural enemy. You rip off a hunk of bread so hard it might qualify as a blunt weapon, dip it into the pottage and chew carefully, or risk cracking a molar. Historians still debate how much damage medieval bread did to teeth. The evidence? An alarming number of medieval skeletons with worn-down molars and cracked enamel. A thin ale or watered-down beer accompanies your meal, not because you're throwing a party at 6 a.m., but because water is often unsafe. Fermented drinks are simply the healthier option. No, really. As you sip your breakfast beer, which tastes vaguely like sour bread soup, you notice the neighbor's pig has once again knocked over someone's firewood pile. This is the third time this week. You sigh. Medieval pigs are not known for their manners. Outside the village center, the local mill is already groaning to life. Powered by water or wind, it's the heart of daily sustenance. But don't get too excited. Milling comes with its own problems. Millers are notoriously distrusted. Legend says they always take more grain than they're supposed to. Whether that's true or just standard medieval gossip remains an open question scholars still argue over. You scarf the last bite of bread brick, wipe your hands on your tunic, which, let's be honest, isn't clean anyway, and brace yourself. Because now comes the real challenge. Work. Whether you're a peasant farmer, an apprentice, or just the local unfortunate assigned to muck the animal pens, your body is about to be put through tasks that would make a modern CrossFit champion cry. You walk past the communal oven where a few families are already baking bread. The smell is glorious, briefly masking the omnipresent scent of, well, everything else. Communal ovens are both a social hub and a fire hazard. Everyone uses them. But don't leave your loaf unattended. Medieval bread theft is absolutely a thing. On the edge of the village, a group of workers is gathering to head to the fields. You join them because in the Middle Ages, if you don't work, you don't eat. Simple as that. The air is brisk, the ground still damp from last night's rain. Your shoes, if you even have any, are little more than stitched leather scraps barely keeping your feet off the mud. And the mud, it finds you anyway. Oh yes, it always does. As you trudge towards the fields, the distant sound of church bells rings out. It's the canonical hour of prime, roughly 6 a.m., time for morning prayers. You cross yourself out of habit. Even if you're not particularly devout, public displays of piety are expected. The church watches everything. Literally. The local priest's house is the only building besides the Lord's Manor with anything resembling real glass in the windows. Speaking of the manor, you glance up the hill. The Lord's house looms over the village both physically and socially. It's bigger, sturdier, and crucially, it has a roof that doesn't leak. You'll probably be summoned there at some point, whether it's to pay taxes, attend court, or get fined for letting your pig wander into the chapel again. Well, time will tell. Reaching the fields, you pick up a crude wooden hoe. It's splintered, heavy, and about as ergonomic as a sack of bricks. Time to start digging, planting, or harvesting, depending on the season. The sun creeps higher. Sweat starts to bead on your brow despite the cold. Your back protests, your hands blister, and your stomach, the one that barely had bread for breakfast, grumbles already. You pause for a moment, stretching, and gaze across the fields. A flock of birds wheels overhead. Somewhere, someone's shouting, probably about that pig. Again, you realize something strange. Despite the mud, the ache, the constant low-level discomfort, this is just life. Normal. Ordinary. No one thinks it's particularly miserable because there's no alternative. This is reality. Still, as you wipe your brow with your sleeve, now streaked with mud and something suspiciously green, you can't help but wonder, how on earth does anyone make it past lunch? Mid-morning arrives, though your body insists it must be closer to midnight. Time, it seems, stretches differently when your job is move dirt until the dirt wins. The tools are crude, a wooden plow if you're lucky, dragged by an even crankier ox who's clearly as tired of this as you are. If not, it's back-breaking hoe work. You notice your hands, raw, blistered, and dust-caked, and briefly consider inventing gloves. But alas, you were born several centuries too early for that minor luxury. The work rhythm is simple. Dig, plant, sweat, complain, quietly, repeat. Your only soundtrack? The creak of wooden carts, the occasional moo, and the never-ending bickering of fellow villagers over whose turn it is to repair the fence the sheep demolished. Again. Now, here's the kicker. Historians still debate just how many work breaks medieval peasants actually got. Some argue the church calendar, packed with religious feast days, offered more days off than modern jobs. Others point out that even days off often meant unpaid labor for the local lord. Lucky you. Around this time, a bell chimes from the village. Not a lunch bell, no such luxury, but the church signaling terse roughly 9 a.m. Another prayer break. You wipe your hands, cross yourself, and pretend to focus while mentally calculating whether there's enough pottage left at home for dinner. A traveling peddler ambles by, pushing a rickety cart full of mysterious wares. Beads, rough cloth, maybe a comb. The villagers swarm him like pigeons on breadcrumbs. Anything, to break the monotony of daily survival. You eye a wooden spoon shaped vaguely like a lopsided duck. Is it practical? No. Do you want it? Also no. But it's the most exciting thing you've seen all week. You exchange a few coin, assuming you have any. Money is rare. Most transactions are barter. You might trade eggs, firewood, or even labor. But currency is gaining traction in certain towns. Historians still argue when exactly the rural economy began shifting toward coin-based systems. Suddenly, a sharp shout draws your attention. One of the younger lads stepped on something nasty, possibly a rusted horseshoe buried in the mud. Sanitation, as you may have noticed, is not this society's strong suit. Wounds get packed with whatever herbs the village herbalist has on hand, plus a quick prayer that infection doesn't set in. Spoiler, it often does. As the sun climbs higher, so does the smell. Everything smells. You, the oxen, the compost heap that refuses to stay politely downwind. Medieval deodorant? Well, it's mostly wishful thinking. People sometimes carry pomanders, little balls of herbs and resin, to mask the funk. Whether that helps or just creates scented misery is questionable. Somewhere in the distance, the church bell rings sext, midday prayers. Your back seizes with gratitude, not because you're particularly pious, but because it means it's time for the closest thing to lunch. You trudge back, toward the village square where others are gathering. Lunch, much like breakfast, is humble. More bread, more pottage. If fortune smiles, someone might have snared a rabbit or found mushrooms. Carefully checked, of course, since the last guy, who misidentified a mushroom, still isn't feeling great. Well, wasn't. A few villagers share a slab of cheese so hard it could double as armor. And there's always the ale. Always. Safer than water, but by this point in the day you're starting to suspect it's also how everyone remains just tipsy, enough to tolerate existence. As you chew through your meal, literally chew with effort, you overhear gossip. The Lord's wife has been complaining of bad humors. The barber surgeon will likely bleed her soon to rebalance her bodily fluids. Whether it works is dubious. Historians still debate whether medieval bloodletting was more placebo or genuinely effective. But the leeches certainly had steady employment. Just as you're thinking about sneaking an extra piece of bread, a crier from the manor arrives. He reads from a scroll with all the enthusiasm of someone who's had to do this twice already today. All villagers are hereby reminded that tithe payments are due. 1/10 of grain, eggs, or other produce must be delivered to the parish by week's end. Failure to comply may result in forfeiture of livestock or other holdings. You sigh. Again. As the crier leaves, someone mutters, "At least the pig doesn't count. It's technically still wild." Whether that holds up in court remains to be seen. Belly's somewhat full, back's still aching. It's time to head back to the fields. Because, as everyone reminds you, the dirt won't dig itself. Afternoon settles in with the subtlety of a brick to the face. The sun, which this morning seemed merely pesky, is now a merciless overseer, glaring down as if personally offended by your existence. Your shirt, scratchy wool of course, clings to your back with the tenacity of a needy barn cat. Back to the fields. Always the fields. Whether it's sowing, weeding, or harvesting, your role is simple. Do what the seasons demand or starve. You stoop, yank weeds, and try to avoid the patch of stinging nettles that claimed old Tom's dignity and skin last a week. Your knees creak, your spine protests, and it occurs to you that, despite being only 30 years old, your joints feel about 112. Curious fact: historians still debate the true average lifespan of medieval peasants. You've probably heard the old people only live to 35 claim, but that number is skewed by infant mortality. If you survive childhood, a big if, you might limp your way into your 50s, assuming plagues, famines, wars, or an exceptionally grumpy mule didn't get you first. Speaking of plagues, a buzz spreads through the villagers as a cloaked figure on horseback approaches. A tax collector. Or worse, a bailiff. You try to look busy. Everyone does. You suddenly care very deeply about the well-being of this specific patch of barley. Fortunately, the figure rides past toward the manor. You exhale. The communal tension dissolves like morning fog, replaced by a mix of relief and bitter jokes about the king's pockets growing heavier than his crown. Nearby, a neighbor complains about their thatched roof leaking. Again. You recall thatching it together last spring with bundles of straw, mud, and prayers. And yes, roofs leak. They always leak. It's just a question of whether it's a drizzle or an indoor waterfall. Another neighbor is patching shoes, not their own, but someone else's. The cobbler travels between villages, trading repairs for bread, ale, or whatever's handy. You glance at your own footwear, basically wooden clogs with a strap, and wonder how your toes have survived this long. Spoiler, they might not. A sudden scream interrupts your thoughts. It's the miller's wife scolding her children who were poking at a snake. Is it venomous? Unclear. You take a step back anyway. Random hazards are just part of the day. Wild boars, wolves, even bears roam the forest edges. That's why every child over 5 knows how to wield a stick. For defense, or let's be honest, for hitting siblings. Historians still debate how common large predators actually were in heavily settled regions. Some argue they were exaggerated in folktales. Others point to records of bounties offered for wolf pelts well into the 1600s. As the afternoon slogs forward, the village baker stokes his oven, a communal beast made of stone and clay. He doesn't just bake for himself. Everyone brings their loaves to him, since owning your own oven is both wildly expensive and, in many places, illegal. The Lord demands a tax on bread baked privately, yet another fun little rule in the medieval bingo card of suffering. You briefly daydream about what bread might taste like without chunks of grit baked in. Grinding grain with hand-powered stone mills leaves behind tiny flecks of rock. Dentists, were they a thing, would have had a booming business. An elder shuffles by, muttering about the weather. Everyone listens because elders claim to read. The sky like a book. Ravens flying low, he says. Storm's coming. Maybe. Or maybe the ravens just saw something shiny. A child nearby is tasked with scaring birds away from the crops, waving their arms and shouting. It's a full-time job, believe it or not. One that pays in leftover crusts and occasional head pats. By late afternoon, your arms feel like overcooked noodles. You pause to stretch, carefully, because the last thing you need is throwing out your back when there's no such thing as medieval physical therapy. Your stomach rumbles. Again, you daydream, not of gold or power or adventure, but of soup. Just soup. Maybe with something extra in it. A carrot, a slice of salted pork, a wildly optimistic amount of beans. Somewhere nearby, someone is digging clay for repairs. The same clay gets shaped into pots, tiles, and bricks, assuming it doesn't collapse in on itself like poor Martin's last attempt, now known locally as the Pit of Regret. The sun inches toward the horizon. Evening is approaching. But first, one last chore awaits. Someone's pig is loose. Again. Cue half the village chasing after it, yelling, waving sticks, and tripping over rocks. You sigh, jog after the others, and briefly reflect that the pig is, at this moment, the fastest living creature in Europe. The pig chase becomes, as usual, both community exercise and slapstick entertainment. You and half a dozen neighbors zigzag through muddy lanes, narrowly avoiding piles of, well, let's just call it natural fertilizer. The pig jukes left, then right, faster than anyone should expect from a creature shaped like a loaf of bread with legs. Eventually, after slipping, sliding, and perhaps inventing several new medieval curse words, someone manages to corner it against the fence. A rope loops around its belly, and the pig lets out an indignant squeal that could probably summon demons if anyone were listening closely enough. With the pig secured, the village collectively exhales. It's a small victory, but victories are rare enough that even this feels momentous. But there's no time to bask in the glory of pig wrangling. The evening chores are calling, loudly, like that rooster that never seems to shut up. Your next task is water. You grab a wooden bucket, heavy even when empty, and head toward the village well. The line has already formed. People chat quietly, discussing crop yields, gossiping about who might secretly be a witch. Spoiler, probably no one, but that never stops the rumors, and debating whether the miller is overcharging. Again, drawing water is tedious. Crank the handle, hear the groan of rope and wood, wait for the bucket to splash, and then haul it up. You repeat this process until your arms feel like overcooked noodles again. A recurring theme in your medieval fitness routine. Water secured, it's time to prepare dinner. You head back to your humble home. A one-room hut with wattle and daub walls, a thatched roof that leaks when it remembers to, and a dirt floor swept daily but still somehow always dirty. The hearth is the heart of the home, both figuratively and literally. It's your stove, your heater, your nightlight, and sometimes, regrettably, your smoke machine. Chimneys aren't common yet, so most of the smoke just hangs around, slowly finding its way out through holes in the thatch. Or not. Tonight's dinner? Pottage. Again, pottage is a delightful medieval term for whatever we could throw in a pot and boil until edible. Barley, leeks, onions, maybe a few wild herbs. And look, surprise. Someone managed to catch a rabbit earlier. Luxury. As the pot bubbles, the smell fills your tiny home. You step outside to enjoy the relative freshness of the evening air, which smells like firewood, wet earth, and the unmistakable perfume of livestock. But compared to the smoke indoors, it's practically mountain air. Nearby, someone is repairing a fence. Another neighbor sharpens tools, with a whetstone worn down from generations of use. You offer a nod. Social interaction here isn't about chatting idly. It's about exchanging labor, favors, and the occasional passive-aggressive comment about whose cow wandered into whose garden. A sudden bell rings out, the manor's curfew bell. Historians still debate whether every village strictly enforced curfews, but generally speaking, when the bell tolls, fires are banked, doors are shut, and anyone caught wandering might get questioned or fined, for reasons ranging from preventing crime to, we just felt like taxing you today. You bank your hearth's fire carefully, not out but low, preserving embers for the morning. Matches don't exist yet, and flint and steel are tedious. Losing your fire means begging a neighbor for a coal, or worse, spending an hour desperately, rubbing sticks together like a woodland creature in a survival show. With the fire sorted, you settle in for your meal. It's simple, filling, and, despite the grit crunching between your teeth, comforting. Somewhere in the distance, a lute player strums a tune. Is it good? No. Is it soothing? Also no. But it's better than silence, which often means something's wrong. Like wolves. As darkness settles in, the conversation turns to tomorrow. Will it rain? Will the barley hold out another week? Will the tax collector remember your name? You quietly hope the answer to that last one is no. A neighbor mentions that someone in the next village over claims to have seen lights dancing in the woods, will-o'-the-wisps maybe, or smugglers, or bored teenagers, though that last category won't be invented for another few centuries. Historians still argue whether these folklore sightings were simple misinterpretations of natural phenomena, or whether communities deliberately kept these stories alive to discourage children from wandering too far after dark. Either way, you make a mental note to stay well away from the forest tonight. The stars come out, brilliant and sharp in a sky unpolluted by modern lights. You trace familiar patterns, the hunter, the plow, the bear, the same constellations your ancestors named, and your descendants will too, assuming they survive the next winter. Inside, your straw mattress awaits. It's lumpy. It smells vaguely of last year's hay. It is, objectively, terrible. But it is yours. You blow out the tallow candle. Darkness. Quiet, except for the wind, the occasional howl, and the rhythmic snoring of the pig now safely back in its pen. Sleep doesn't come quickly, not because of stress. Stress is a permanent roommate, but because straw mattresses are frankly terrible. You shift, poke at a particularly aggressive lump, and eventually drift into restless dreams of endless weeding, elusive pigs, and maybe, just maybe, a dinner that doesn't crunch. You wake not to the sound of birds chirping, but to the unmistakable call of a cow in distress. It's either in labor or mildly offended that breakfast is late, possibly both. The sun isn't quite up, but in medieval timekeeping, that's as good a wake-up call as any. You groan, stretch, and remember too late that your mattress has weaponized straw points. One jabs you square in the back like it's demanding rent. Outside, the village is already stirring. Smoke curls from a few chimneys, the early risers who manage to keep their fires alive overnight. The air is brisk, damp, and smells like wet wood and responsibility. You toss on your outer tunic, scratch at the one spot your washing stone didn't quite degrime yesterday, and head out. First chore of the day? Milking. You're no expert, but neither is the cow. She eyes you with a look of passive judgment, like a very large, uttered librarian. With a few words of encouragement and one accidental foot stomp, the task is done. The milk is tepid, slightly grassy, and has a 50% chance of turning into cheese or mystery sludge by mid-morning. Then it's on to the next thrill, mucking the byre. You shovel straw and dung with a wooden pitchfork, which does about as much as you'd expect. There's no rubber boots, no gloves, and absolutely no nose plugs. It's earthy, and yet it's oddly satisfying. There's a rhythm to it, a strange sense of order. Even the flies seem resigned to their fate. Once finished, you stop to admire your cleanish work. Then you hear it. A long, slow gurgle. Not from you. From the sky. Rain. Again. Historians still debate how well medieval peasants could predict weather, but everyone agrees on one thing. They talked about it constantly. Will it rain? It's raining. It just stopped raining. I hope it doesn't rain again. It was the medieval version of small talk. You duck inside, grab your hooded cloak, a rectangle of wool that's about as waterproof as a slice of bread, and prepare for the day's labor in the fields. Today's task? Planting flax. The process is simple but exhausting. You stride down neat rows with a sack of seeds at your waist, tossing them in arcs like a slightly disoriented wizard casting a very boring spell. As you work, your mind drifts. You remember last year when one particularly bad storm turned the entire field into a swamp, and 3 people lost their shoes permanently. One never recovered emotionally. Flax is important, not just for linen, but also for oil and income. Yet the planting requires timing, patience, and knees that don't audibly creak. Yours do, loudly. At midday, you break for a quick meal. Bread, again. It's coarse, dense, and possibly illegal in 3 modern countries. You smear it with some preserved lard. For variety, you chew on a pickled onion, which punches you square in the taste buds and clears your sinuses so effectively it might qualify as spiritual cleansing. Nearby, a traveling friar is preaching to a small gathering. You wander over. His sermon is about humility and the dangers of ale. His breath smells like he's deeply familiar with both. You listen politely, nod a few times, and wonder what it's like to be able to read. Probably amazing. Probably also irrelevant when your roof leaks and your feet are wet 340 days a year. After the break, it's time to fetch firewood from the forest's edge. This task sounds idyllic until you're 5 minutes in and realize you've become a walking bramble collection system. Your cloak snags every thorn in sight. A bird laughs at you. You do not take it personally. It's a magpie. Basically the medieval equivalent of a Twitter troll. On the way back, you spot a traveler on the road. A merchant, maybe. His shoes are too clean. You nod politely, grip your bundle of firewood tighter, and walk faster. Robbery is rare in daylight, but caution is a full-time job here. You remind yourself to sharpen your knife tonight. The blade is more tool than weapon, but it's your Swiss Army solution to everything from slicing meat to prying stuck door hinges. By late afternoon, your arms are jelly. Your back is singing the song of its people, a ballad of creaks and regrets. And still, there's more to do. Mending clothes, checking the thatch, bartering with a neighbor for eggs because your hen has taken a vow of silence and celibacy. At one point, you stop and just breathe. The sky has cleared. The late sun casts everything in gold. Children chase each other around a pile of logs. An old man carves a spoon and mutters to himself about how spoons used to be better. You can smell wood smoke and bread baking. For a moment, it's not bad, not luxurious, not easy, but full of tiny textured joys. You sit by the door of your home, polishing a worn buckle with a rag and a bit of tallow. There's something meditative about repetitive tasks, like scrubbing, or chopping, or staring blankly at the same spot in the wall where the plaster always cracks. As evening creeps, in the village slows, the pig, yes, that pig is already asleep, snoring so loudly it rattles your cookware. Somewhere someone starts singing. A lullaby, maybe. Or a lament. It's hard to tell in a minor key. Back inside, you prep the hearth again. Light it. Tend it. Stare into it like it might offer answers. It doesn't. But it's warm. And that's enough. One more bowl of pottage. One more stale heel of bread. One more satisfied sigh as you sink onto your mattress and pretend the straw pokes are pressure point therapy. You think of all the things you've done today. Not heroic, not glamorous, but essential. And somehow, through the blisters, the aching shoulders, and the emotional trauma caused by a smug bird, you made it. The rooster has opinions. Loud ones. It's unclear what it's so enthusiastic about, given that it neither pays taxes nor harvests flax. But here it is again, screaming directly into existence before the sun is even properly awake. You roll over, or rather attempt to. Your shoulder reminds you, in no uncertain terms, that yesterday involved hauling what felt like half the forest back to your home. Your hips chime in too. Everything hurts, but in that strangely satisfying way that hard, honest labor delivers. Outside, the sky is smeared with soft gray. A fine mist hangs in the air, making the whole village feel like it's been gently dunked in soup. You breathe deeply. Smells like mud, smoke, damp wool, and hope. Or mildew. Historians still argue which was more prevalent. Today is market day. And that, in medieval terms, is equal parts opportunity, chaos, and very specific smells. You lace your shoes, leather, worn, and so stiff, they double as defensive tools. A quick splash of cold water to the face does very little except confirm that yes, you are in fact alive. You load your goods onto a small handcart, bundles of flax, some roughly hewn wooden bowls, and, if you're lucky, several eggs, assuming the hen finally broke her existential crisis and remembered her purpose in life. The walk to market is a social event whether you want it or not. Villagers, traders, and travelers form a slow-moving parade of humanity, livestock, and gossip. You pass a man leading 3 geese tied together by their necks. The geese look personally offended. At the entrance to the market square, the sounds hit first. Hawkers shouting prices, children laughing, someone in the back hammering metal. A lute plays nearby, valiantly trying to stay in tune despite having clearly lost one string, and maybe the will to live. You wheel your cart to a semi-flat patch of ground, claim it with the placement of one suspiciously flat rock, and begin arranging your wares. Presentation matters. A neat stack of flax is the medieval equivalent of a solid LinkedIn profile. The customers arrive in waves. First, the early traders. They're here for deals, scanning the goods with eyes sharpened by years of experience, or chronic squinting from bad lighting. A woman fingers your flax, sniffing it like it might whisper secrets. "Damp," she declares. You nod, resisting the urge to reply, "Yes, it's the weather's fault. Tell it, not me." Next come the locals. A farmer trades you a small wheel of slightly suspect cheese in exchange for one of your wooden bowls. Another offers a copper coin for the eggs, then throws in a half-rotted apple as a bonus, which you graciously accept because manners are currency here too. By midday, you've offloaded half your goods and rest your legs by leaning against the cart. Around you, the market's rhythm hums along. Someone's selling spiced wine out of a barrel. The smell makes your stomach both curious and deeply cautious. Nearby, a man demonstrates a curious new invention, a hinged box designed to store salt. The crowd stares like it's witchcraft. Historians still debate how widespread these little technological tweaks were. Some say rural communities eagerly adopted anything that made life easier. Others argue most innovations were viewed with suspicion until a neighbor tried it first and didn't spontaneously combust. You take a moment to wander. The textile stall has dyed wools in hues so rich they look almost fake. Deep crimson, golden yellow, sea blue. You wonder how much it costs. The answer is too much, plus your second-best tunic and perhaps a kidney. A baker hawks pies filled with minced meat and questionable mushrooms. The smell is compelling. Against better judgment, you buy one. The pastry is dense enough to stop an arrow, but the filling is oddly comforting. You mentally add mystery, pie, to the list of things that might either sustain or kill you today. Nearby, a barber surgeon sets up his stool. A man sits, and without preamble, the barber begins extracting a tooth. No anesthesia, unless you count the man gripping the edge of his seat so hard he might splinter it. You flinch. The crowd doesn't. Entertainment is entertainment. One merchant displays bright copper pins and buckles. You pick one up, admire the shine, then put it down like you've just touched a Fabergé egg. It costs more than a week's grain. Then you hear it. Drums. A troupe of traveling performers arrives. Acrobats jesters a man who claims he can swallow fire. Though judging by the smell of his breath, it's more likely he swallows questionable spirits. Children flood forward. You stay back, but you watch. There's something magical about it. Briefly, wonderfully, the weight of daily life lifts. Still, markets are for more than shopping, they're for information. A trader from the next town over tells of a flood that wiped out an entire wheat field. Another mutters rumors of a distant war, far enough that it feels like a story, close enough that it makes you worry about taxes going up again. By late afternoon, your earnings are modest but solid. A few coins, some new cloth patches, and a meat pie that's somehow both comforting and terrifying. You pack up the cart, muscles already whispering protests. The road home is quieter. The geese are still there, now sitting sullenly as if contemplating life choices. As you near your village, you stop for a moment at the hilltop. The fields stretch out below, gold and green patchworked with hedges and footpaths. Smoke curls from chimneys. The sky for once is clear. And despite everything, the aching arms, the soggy shoes, the pie currently arguing with your stomach, you realize this isn't so bad. Not simple, not easy, but not bad. You breathe deep, let the damp wind chill your face, and start the final stretch home. The pig greets you with an unimpressed grunt. The rooster is somehow still yelling. And you're already thinking about tomorrow. Back home, the evening routine unfolds with the sort of predictability that's both comforting and mildly exhausting. Your legs feel like wooden beams. Your hands ache from gripping the cart. And there's a definite question mark hovering over whether that meat pie was a good idea. Spoiler, it wasn't. First order of business, unload. The flax goes into the storage corner, stacked carefully to avoid the eternal wrath of mold. The wooden bowls get set aside for future trade, or perhaps to be repurposed into something else entirely if no one wants them next time. That's how things work here. Objects have lives, purposes, and often second careers. The animals demand attention next. The pig looks at you like it's been personally wronged by your absence. You top up its trough with leftover scraps. The hen has miraculously produced another egg. Either it feels guilty for slacking or it's motivated by the fear of becoming soup. As you gather kindling for the fire, a familiar ache creeps into your lower back. You straighten up slowly, wincing. Historians still argue whether medieval people were simply tougher or just perpetually in pain and didn't talk about it because, frankly, what was the point? Supper tonight is simple but hearty. A thin porridge made from barley, thickened with whatever's left over from market day. You toss in a few herbs, a slice of dubious sausage, and a pinch of salt you traded for earlier. The pot bubbles over the fire, sending up little clouds of steam that smell like, well, survival. You sit on the low stool by the hearth. The fire crackles, its warmth seeping into your bones. For a brief moment, there's nothing to do, nowhere to go. Just the sound of the wind outside, the rhythmic cluck of the hen settling down, and the occasional thump as the pig rearranges itself. But of course, no medieval evening is complete without some minor repairs. You pull out your sewing kit, bone needle, coarse thread, and start mending your cloak. 1 stitch, 2 stitches. The fabric resists like it resents being fixed. You mutter to it. The cloak does not reply. Rude. A neighbor drops by, uninvited but entirely expected. Hospitality isn't optional. It's a social contract. He plops, down by the fire, offering a half-empty jug of something vaguely alcoholic. You sip politely. It tastes like regret and fermented apples, with a hint of despair. He regales you with news. A cow escaped 3 villages over. Someone's daughter got married. And the local miller may or may not be hiding extra grain to dodge taxes. Standard fare. As night deepens, the sky outside shifts from pale gray to inky black. There are no city lights here, only stars, and an absurd number of them scattered like spilled salt across velvet. You step outside for a moment to relieve yourself, far from the house, thank you very much, and take in the sheer vastness of it. The air is crisp, damp, and carries the faint scent of peat fires from neighboring homes. You notice movement near the hedgerow. For a tense moment, every instinct screams predator. A wolf? A thief? Worse, the tax collector? But no, it's just a hedgehog trundling about its business, snuffling in the undergrowth. You exhale. Crisis averted. Returning. Inside, you check the door latch. A simple wooden bar dropped across the frame. It won't stop anyone determined, but it keeps out the wind and wandering livestock, which is sometimes the greater threat. The hearth embers glow, sending soft light flickering across the rough walls. You settle onto your straw mattress, lumpy, slightly damp, but yours. The blanket smells like smoke, wool, and faintly of goat. Comfort is relative, but sleep isn't guaranteed. You shift. You turn. The wind howls outside like an unpaid bard. The mattress pokes you in places you didn't know had nerves. And your brain, traitorous thing, won't shut up. It cycles through a playlist of existential dread. Will next year's harvest fail? Did you leave the pig gate open? Was that pie actually meat? Sleep in the medieval world is a strange affair. There's evidence that people often slept in 2 distinct phases, first sleep and second sleep, with a period of wakefulness in between. Historians still debate whether this was a choice, a consequence of natural circadian rhythms, or just a side effect of being constantly cold, itchy, and stressed. During that in-between period, folks might pray, tend the fire, check on animals, or, let's be honest, stare at the ceiling wondering how their life decisions led to being stabbed by straw for the 100th night in a row. You try adjusting your position. Right side? No. Hip hurts. Left side? Arms asleep. On your back? Congratulations. Now your nose is cold. The pig grunts in its pen. The rooster, confused about time as always, lets out a single baffled crow. Finally, after what feels like both 5 minutes and eternity, you drift. Dreams are strange here. Half memories, half worries, and one recurring nightmare about dropping a full jug of milk in front of the entire market square. And just as you slip into proper unconsciousness, a loud thump at the door. You jolt, upright, heart hammering. Who knocks after dark? You freeze. A knock at the door after sundown is never good news. It's not like anyone's delivering cookies. Visitors at this hour mean one of three things. Someone's sick, something's on fire, or the local reeve needs an unpaid favor. Which, let's be honest, is the worst of the three. You pull the blanket around your shoulders like medieval armor, shuffle to the door, and lift the wooden bar with a soft creak. Peering into the darkness, you spot a figure. Lantern in hand, face shadowed but familiar. It's Thomas, the cooper's apprentice from 2 cottages over. Judging by his breathless look and the fact that he's still wearing his work apron, this isn't a social call. Flood. He pants. The stream's overrun. Of course. Because why shouldn't your evening involve a mild natural disaster? You glance past him. Sure enough, the distant gurgle of water is louder than usual and the air smells damp. Wetter than damp, really. More like the sky itself tripped and spilled. You pull on your shoes. Still wet from earlier because nothing dries in this climate, and grab a lantern. Stepping out, your feet immediately sink into mud. It squelches up between your toes in a way that no one, medieval or modern, finds remotely pleasant. Down by the stream, a small crowd has gathered. Farmers, shepherds, the reeve himself, all armed with shovels, buckets, and the grim determination of people who know this won't work, but feel morally obligated to try anyway. Turns out, the beaver dam upstream finally gave up. Nature's own civil engineers went on strike and the water rushed down like it had somewhere better to be. Several gardens are already underwater. The cabbage patch looks like it's preparing to grow seaweed. Your job, Hullstones, because if there's one thing that solves everything in medieval life, it's apply more rocks to problem. As you trudge back and forth, balancing slippery stones in a wheelbarrow whose wheel squeaks with existential despair, you wonder, yet again, why humans insist on settling near water despite centuries of evidence suggesting water doesn't like us very much. Historians still debate whether medieval villages had any meaningful flood prevention, or if everyone simply accepted that sometimes your house is also a pond. Someone shouts. A child's wooden toy floats by, a little horse on wheels, drifting toward what is now, briefly, Lake Village Square. You snatch it, set it aside, no reason it should drown too. After an hour of frantic stacking and digging, the water recedes slightly, not because of your heroic efforts, but because it ran out of things to flood. Small victories. The reeve claps everyone on the back with the weary enthusiasm of someone pretending this counts as community bonding. Good work, he grunts. Could have been worse. It always could have been worse. On the way back, your neighbor Edith, never one to miss an opportunity for gossip, walks alongside you. She leans in, whispering like the flood might overhear. Did you hear? Agnes up the hill claims her cow gave birth to twins. Bad omen, that. Twins. A miracle or a curse, depending entirely on who you ask. Historians still argue whether rural superstitions served as genuine belief systems or convenient explanations for why life was always so, well, eventful. You finally return home, feet soaked, shoulders aching. The fire has long since gone out, leaving the cottage cold and smelling faintly of wet wool and regret. Relighting the fire is a whole process. Flint, steel, and the stubborn refusal of damp kindling to do anything useful. Sparks fly, catch on a scrap of cloth, and after much coaxing and more than a few muttered threats, the flames begrudgingly appear. You strip off your wet shoes, set them by the hearth, and flop back onto the mattress, which somehow feels even lumpier than before. Maybe the straw rearranged itself out of spite. Outside, the wind has shifted. The sky is clearing. Stars emerge, one by one, and the moon hangs low, silver and solemn, illuminating the landscape that now glistens with puddles. The pig snores. You stare at the ceiling beams, rough-hewn wood, slightly warped, one of them suspiciously cracked. You make a mental note to fix it tomorrow, or the next day, or maybe never. It hasn't fallen yet. A sudden sharp itch on your ankle. Flea. Of course, you scratch. Another on your neck. Medieval life. Come for the history. Stay for the involuntary blood donations. At least the flooding's done. For now. You shift under the blanket. The straw pokes. The wind howls. But your eyes grow heavy. Despite, or maybe because of, the sheer exhaustion woven into every fiber of this life, sleep creeps closer. The last thing you hear before drifting off is the soft, rhythmic sound of rain starting again. Not enough for a flood, just enough to remind you who's really in charge around here. Nature. Always nature. Morning arrives, not with the gentle warmth of sunlight filtering through linen curtains, but with a rooster that clearly holds a personal grudge against you. You groan. Every muscle aches in ways you didn't know were possible. Shoulders, back, calves, even your eyebrows hurt somehow. Turns out that stacking rocks in the dark while ankle-deep in mud isn't particularly ergonomic. As you pry, yourself out of bed, really more of a hay pile with commitment issues, your first realization is that your shoes are still wet. Perfect. Nothing says good morning, like sliding your feet into something cold, clammy, and shaped vaguely, like despair. The pig's already awake, sniffing around for breakfast. You are also awake, but less enthusiastic about it. Today's main task? Market day. A rare chance to leave the village, walk to the neighboring town, and engage in the most thrilling of medieval pastimes, trying not to get cheated. You sling a woven basket over your shoulder. It's older than you are, and about as reliable, and step out into the road, which has transitioned from muddy to slippery catastrophe. The air smells of damp earth, wood smoke, and the faint, ever-present hint of manure. Comfortingly familiar, if not exactly pleasant. The road to town is about 3 miles, assuming you don't get sidetracked by fallen trees, impromptu floods, or wandering livestock. Along the way, you pass neighbors with similar missions. There's Walter the Thatcher, already grumbling about roof repairs, Matilda, balancing an impressive stack of eggs, and old Geoffrey, who's been selling the same suspiciously dented pots for at least a decade. Halfway there, you encounter one of medieval life's less glamorous hazards, the toll bridge. Ah yes, the timeless tradition of paying someone to cross a bridge you technically helped build, either with taxes, labor, or sheer passive suffering. The bridge keeper, leaning lazily against the railing, extends his hand. 2 pennies. You blink. 2? Last time it was 1. New rate. He shrugs. On account of maintenance. You glance at the bridge, a rickety contraption held together by faith, frayed ropes, and maybe 3 functional planks. Maintenance seems like a stretch. Historians still argue whether toll bridges were genuinely meant for infrastructure, funding, or just clever medieval extortion with a polite smile. You grumble but pay. Arguing risks more than just a wasted morning. The bridge keeper has friends, and none of them are known for subtlety. On the other side, the town slowly comes into view. From a distance it looks charming. Timber-framed houses, smoke curling from chimneys, the steeple of the church rising above it all. Up close, it smells like fish, spoiled ale, and densely packed humanity. Market stalls line the square, offering everything from fresh bread to questionable meats, from bundles of herbs to fabrics dyed in colors that were probably illegal somewhere. You weave through the crowd. A woman hawks garlic as a cure for everything. Headaches, demons, nosy neighbors. A man loudly advertises miracle shoes, guaranteed not to fall apart for at least 2 weeks. One stall catches your eye. A scribe, selling letters, not books. Heavens no, those are wildly expensive, but single letters. Want to send a note to a cousin in another town? He'll write it for you, assuming you can afford the fee. Literacy is a luxury. You stop by the baker. His loaves are dark, heavy, and slightly burnt, just the way they're supposed to be. White bread exists, but only for the rich. Your bread comes with texture, meaning small rocks, and the occasional uninvited wheat husk. As you barter, For cheese, Matilda appears beside you. "Did you hear?" she asks, voice low, already savoring the gossip. "The miller's wife says she saw a comet last night." "A comet? That's never good. Bad omen." She nods gravely, as if this were a universal truth written in the stars themselves. "Means something terrible's coming." Given that terrible is the default setting of medieval life, you're not sure how much worse it can get. Historians still debate whether medieval people genuinely believed in cosmic omens, or if it was just a socially acceptable way to say, "Things are weird, and I don't like it." You buy a small bundle of leeks, some eggs, carefully, checked for cracks, trust no one, and start the trek home. The clouds have returned. A light drizzle beginning, because of course it does. The road is even slipperier now, and as you navigate the familiar path, a sudden movement in the bushes startles you. A wild boar? A bandit? Nope. Just Edith's goat escaped again. You consider trying to catch it, but wisely decide that's a problem for future you. Or better yet, for Edith. Back home, you unload your basket, wipe the mud from your shoes, futile, and realize with a sinking feeling that it's already midday, and you still haven't fetched water. The well waits. It always does. You grab the yoke, a heavy wooden frame that balances 2 buckets, and trudge to the village well. The line is long. It's always long. You exchange tired nods with fellow sufferers in the water-fetching queue. Nobody's happy about this. Drawing water isn't just about lowering a bucket. It's about hoping the rope holds, the pulley doesn't jam, and that the water isn't too muddy today. As you hoist the full buckets, a sudden gust of wind sloshes half the water onto your legs. Excellent. Wet shoes, round 3. The walk home feels twice as long with 40 pounds of water hanging from your shoulders. Every step is a reminder that medieval fitness isn't about aesthetics. It's about survival. Congratulations. Your calves are now the strongest part of your body. Back inside, you set the buckets down, mop the puddle from the floor with a rag that qualifies more as a suggestion than an actual cleaning tool, and glance at the sky. Still gray, still raining. You sigh, settle onto the stool, and start peeling leeks for dinner. Outside, the pig snuffles. The rooster plots his next sonic assault. And life, damp, muddy, exhausting, and weirdly comforting, goes on. As the afternoon stretches on, you're greeted by the familiar realization that being done with one task only means 3 more are quietly waiting to ambush you. Next on the never-ending to-do list, spinning, or mending, or patching, or frankly, whatever it takes to keep your single set of clothes from completely surrendering to entropy. You settle by the fire with a worn wooden spindle. If you don't spin thread, you don't get fabric. If you don't get fabric, well, congratulations, you're inventing the nudist colony about 600 years too early. As your fingers twist the wool, scratchy, stubborn, and occasionally full of mystery debris, the rhythm starts to settle your thoughts. Spin, pinch, draw, wind, repeat. The kind of repetitive task that weirdly almost feels meditative. Almost. Of course, you'd enjoy it a lot more if your hands weren't already blistered from yesterday's charming adventures in medieval lumber logistics. Historians still argue whether spinning was genuinely a peaceful domestic chore, or just the medieval version of mandatory unpaid labor until your knuckles fall off. A sharp snap interrupts your moment of fake peace. The thread breaks again. You sigh. You were warned this fleece was temperamental, which apparently is polite merchant speak for this sheep rolled in something it shouldn't have. Setting the spindle aside, you turn your attention to mending your only tunic. The elbows are wearing thin, again, and the seams are threatening rebellion. You pull out your little sewing kit, a bone needle, a lump of beeswax for the thread, and a few scraps of cloth salvaged from garments that had already lost the war against time. As you patch, your neighbor Godfrey stops by. Not to help, perish the thought, but to share important breaking news. "Did you hear?" he starts, breathless despite having only walked 15 feet. The tanner's apprentice stepped on a nail, right through his boot. You wince, that's grim. "Yeah," Godfrey nods. "Bled like a stuck pig. They say it'll either heal or it won't. Medical certainty, 0. Prognosis, vibes. Godfrey leans in, lowering his voice, and you know what they say, bad things come in threes. First the comet, now this. He raises his eyebrows meaningfully. Just saying. You nod solemnly. Whether or not you believe in omens, one thing is certain. Medieval gossip travels faster than any plague ever could. With your tunic, temporarily saved from the brink of textile oblivion, you check on dinner. Today's luxury offering, pottage. Again, always pottage. Pottage is the Swiss Army knife of medieval cuisine. Take whatever's lying around, leeks, onions, a lonely carrot, questionable herbs, and boil it until it's soft enough that your teeth stop complaining. Add a handful of grains if you're lucky, and voila, dinner. As the pot simmers, you step outside to collect firewood. Rain or not, the fire must be fed. The woodpile, of course, has once again managed to transform from dry stack into mushroom farm. You scrape together what you can, soggy logs, brittle twigs, and that one stubborn chunk that refuses to burn unless personally insulted. On your way back, you glance toward the manor house on the hill. Unlike your mud-walled cottage, the manor boasts stone walls, a proper roof, and actual glass in the windows. Fancy. You imagine what it must be like to live there, to have a real bed, sheets that aren't made of flax sandpaper, and meals that involve both seasoning and meat that wasn't already halfway to walking off on its own. Of course, in exchange, you'd also have to deal with taxes, land disputes, and roughly 47 cousins who expect inheritance. Perhaps not worth it. Back home, you feed the fire, stir the pottage, and throw in a crust of yesterday's bread to thicken it. The smell is edible. Let's go with that. As evening edges closer, the clouds finally start to break. A hesitant streak of sunlight cuts through, catching the smoke curling from chimneys and turning the wet road into a shimmer of reflected gold. For a brief moment, it's almost pretty. The pig approves, snorting contentedly as it roots around for scraps. The chicken, the one that somehow escaped this morning, saunters back as if it hadn't spent the entire day freeloading at someone else's compost heap. Dinner is a quiet affair. Just you, the pottage, and the comforting sound of rain dripping from the eaves. Halfway through, you realize tomorrow is the feast day, which ironically does not involve much feasting for you. It does, however, mean church, obligations, and pretending not to do any actual labor while quietly doing all the labor that can't wait, including, probably, fixing that leak in the roof before it achieves full waterfall status. You check your roof from the doorway. A fresh hole, of course. Historians still debate whether medieval roof repair was a community effort, a family chore, or simply an endless exercise in ignoring leaks until they became structural features. Setting the bowl aside, you drag out the ladder, which is really just a tree with ambition, and climb up to inspect the damage. The view from the roof is, well, damp, but it offers a rare perspective. You can see the field stretching toward the forest, the winding road leading toward the town, and the manor house lording over it all like a smug stone turtle. The sky is clearing. A handful of stars blink through the thinning clouds. Somewhere, in the distance, an owl calls, probably hunting the same rat that's been stealing grain from your storage. With a grunt, you shove a wad of moss into the hole as a temporary fix. Elegant? No. Effective? Also no. But functional until morning? Hopefully. Climbing back down, you realize something remarkable. You are bone-tired, covered in mud, vaguely damp, and yet still alive. Another day in medieval life survived. Somehow. You climb down from the roof, joints complaining like rusty hinges, and land with a soft squelch in the mud, because of course the puddle was right where you needed to step. Your pig watches this performance with what can only be described as deep, porcine judgment. Inside, the fire's burned low. You coax it back to life with the driest twigs you managed to scavenge earlier, then settle onto your lumpy straw mattress. The smell of slightly charred pottage still lingers in the air, mingled with, well, centuries of smoke, damp wool, and questionable hygiene choices. The mattress crunches as you shift. Partly straw, partly hay, and let's be honest, probably part mouse real estate too. You shove the lumpiest bits toward the edges and throw a rough wool blanket over yourself. It's debatably clean. But don't get too comfortable. Tomorrow is the feast day, remember? Which means it's time for church, whether you're deeply spiritual or just spiritually exhausted. You wake before dawn, not because you're virtuous, but because the rooster has exactly one hobby, and it's yelling directly into your soul. Also, it's freezing, the kind of cold that settles directly into your bones, bypassing skin entirely. With the faintest gray creeping into the sky, you shuffle outside for a necessary but distinctly unpleasant visit to the latrine, which, to remind you, is just a hole in the ground with lofty dreams of being something better. The mud squelches between your toes. You sigh. Your life is basically just different textures of damp. Back inside, you scrub your face with water from the rain barrel. It's ice cold and smells vaguely of something. Probably leaves. Hopefully leaves. Personal grooming is simple. Splash water, ignore the pain, move on. You rummage through your belongings for your nice clothes, by which you mean the same tunic, but with 30% fewer holes. It's still stiff from yesterday's emergency mending session, but it'll do. As the church bell begins to toll, you join the slow trickle of villagers heading toward the chapel. It's not grand, more like a stone box with a roof that leaks as enthusiastically as yours. But inside, the faint glow of candles reflects off the damp walls, casting everything in a soft, flickering haze. The service is in Latin. You don't understand a word, but that's fine. Neither does half the congregation. You stand, kneel, mumble approximately the right noises, and try not to fall asleep. The priest delivers a homily that, near as you can guess, is either about sin, taxes, or possibly both. Midway through, your stomach reminds you loudly that pottage is not a food known for its staying power. Historians still argue whether medieval villagers found church services spiritually uplifting, or just an acceptable excuse to stop working for an hour. After Mass, it's time for the social event of the week, the market. You trudge along the muddy road, passing carts laden with vegetables, sacks of grain, and the occasional unlucky chicken tied by its feet, looking deeply unimpressed with the trajectory of its morning. The market is chaos, a symphony of haggling, gossip, and livestock noises. A woman sells bread that's mostly barley and ambition. A tanner hawks scraps of leather that smell aggressively like, well, a tanner's yard. A traveling merchant displays mysterious objects. A copper pin shaped like a bird, a comb carved from bone, a tiny glass bead, imported, expensive, utterly unnecessary, and therefore utterly fascinating. You eye the bread, you eye your coin pouch, which contains exactly one coin. Decisions. Godfrey appears again, grinning. You hear about the blacksmith's apprentice? He starts, because of course he does. Burned his hand. Dropped a horseshoe right on his foot. Cursed so loud the priest heard him from the chapel. Is he all right, you ask? Godfrey shrugs. Foot's twice the size now. Either it'll go down or it won't. Classic medieval optimism. After the market, you detour past the alehouse. Not because you can afford ale, absolutely not, but because it's the best place for news. You linger by the doorway, eavesdropping as travelers swap stories about distant towns, strange weather, and rumors of war. Always rumors of war. You catch a snippet about a neighboring village that's been struck with something mysterious. People falling ill. A sickness they're calling the sweating. Lovely. Historians still debate whether this particular outbreak was an early wave of the plague, a localized infection, or simply a bad batch of undercooked pork. Either way, you make a mental note to boil your water twice today. Heading home, you pass by the manor house. Peasants are hauling sacks of grain toward the Lord's granary, a visual reminder that your taxes are due soon. Grain, eggs, wool, a significant portion of everything you produce will go uphill to the manor, while the yatar scraps trickle back down to you. A deeply inspiring economic model. Back at your cottage, you check on your meager vegetable patch. The onions are looking resentful. The leeks are participating under protest, and the one cabbage you were hoping for has been aggressively nibbled by something with more teeth than mercy. You sigh. Gardening. The eternal struggle between hope and pests. The clouds are rolling back in. Another round of rain is clearly inbound because the weather has read the script and knows exactly how to behave. As you tuck the chickens away, bribe the pig with scraps, and gather the last of the firewood, you reflect briefly on the fact that, despite everything, the mud, the leaks, the existential threat of slightly undercooked sausage, you're still here. And tomorrow, it starts all over again. Dawn peeks over the hills once more, as persistent as your pig's morning demand for breakfast. The rooster, of course, is already at full volume, practicing for his future as the world's least welcome alarm clock. You step outside, stretch, and immediately regret it as your back reminds you that mattresses filled with straw and mouse droppings were never endorsed by chiropractors. The ground is slick with fresh mud. Again. Honestly, at this point, it feels personal. Today's task? Laundry. Which sounds simple, until you remember what doing laundry actually entails in medieval times. First, you gather your dirt-encrusted clothes into a woven basket. Then, it's off to the stream, half a mile away naturally, carrying not only the laundry but also an armload of lye soap made from ash and animal fat. Yes, you made it yourself. Yes, it smells exactly as appetizing as that implies. The walk is uneventful, save for dodging puddles, loose rocks, and the occasional aggressive goose. There's always an aggressive goose. Down at the stream, several. Other villagers are already scrubbing away, sleeves rolled up, hands red from the cold water. The air hums with gossip. "Did you hear?" a woman asks. Old Marjorie's cow gave birth to a calf, with one ear. "Sign of bad luck," another whispers. "Or just a calf with one ear," someone mutters. Historians still argue whether medieval people truly believed every odd event was a portent, or whether some were just excellent at spreading drama. You dunk your tunic into the water. It immediately fights back, stiff from weeks of accumulated grime. Scrubbing is a full-body workout, pounding the fabric against flat stones, working the soap into the fibers, and repeatedly rinsing until the water runs slightly less opaque. No spin cycle here. Just your aching arms and relentless determination. By midday, your hands are raw, your back is sore, and the clothes are, well, cleaner. Damp, heavy, and destined to smell like wet sheep for the next 3 days, but cleaner. Hauling the dripping bundle home, you rig up a drying line between your cottage and the nearest sturdy tree, which, conveniently, is also home to a particularly judgmental crow. It watches, unimpressed as you wrestle the wind, attempting to pin garments with wooden clothespins that are one strong gust away from failure. As the wind picks up, one sleeve flaps free and slaps you squarely in the face. Lovely. Nature's gentle reminder that gravity and luck are not your friends. With the laundry handled, or at least dripping quietly in the breeze, you turn to your next chore. Grinding grain. Inside your cottage sits a small quern stone, a pair of heavy, circular stones used to grind barley or rye into flour. You pour in the grain, grab the wooden handle, and start rotating. It's immediately clear why medieval peasants had excellent forearms. This is labor-intensive, monotonous, and accompanied by a steady soundtrack of grating stone and your own labored breathing. Midway through, your neighbor Edith drops by uninvited but enthusiastic. "Did you hear? They're saying the king might pass through the Shire next month." "Really?" you ask, wiping sweat from your brow. "Probably not," she admits, "but it's what they're saying." Historians still debate how much accurate news ever actually reached rural villages, and whether anyone particularly cared unless taxes were involved. With flour in hand, it's time to bake bread. Not the fluffy, yeasted loaves of modern dreams, but dense rounds of rye bread so heavy they could double as self-defense tools. You mix flour, water, and salt into a sticky mass, slap it onto a flat stone near the fire, and let the heat do the rest. The result? Edible. Sort of. Chewy. Slightly smoky. And gritty. Because no matter how careful you are, bits of the millstone always end up in the flour. This is not a bug. It's a feature. Archaeologists have literally found medieval skeletons with teeth worn down by centuries of stone-filled bread. You gnaw on a chunk, contemplating your life choices. Outside, the village mill creaks into motion as wealthier neighbors pay the miller, with coin or a portion of their grain, to do this grinding for them. You sigh, rotating the quernstone with renewed envy. In the distance, bells toll. Not church bells this time, but the signal that a traveling merchant has arrived. A rare treat. You shuffle to the edge of the green where the merchant has set up shop. His cart overflows with marvels, dyed fabrics and colors that practically scream luxury, tiny glass beads, dried spices from far-off lands you can barely imagine. Cinnamon, cloves, things so valuable that a handful costs more than your cottage. A child stares wide-eyed at a tin whistle. A farmer inspects a knife that might, just might, survive more than one pig slaughter. The merchant pitches his wares in rapid fire, patter, promising everything short of immortality. Imported from the Levant, he claims, holding up a silk scarf, or somewhere near there. Historians still argue whether these merchants were genuinely well-traveled or simply excellent liars with good storytelling skills. You finger the single coin in your pouch, glance at the cheapest item, a tiny comb carved from bone, and decide, maybe next time. As clouds gather once more, you head home. The wind smells like rain, and sure enough, as you reach your cottage, the sky opens up. You're drying laundry? Absolutely soaked, of course it is. With a sigh that could power a small windmill, you drag the damp clothes inside, hang them near the fire, and accept that everything you own will now smell like smoke, wet wool, and mild disappointment for the foreseeable future. Still, as you settle by the fire, nibbling on your stone-flavored bread, you realize something else. You survived the day. Not comfortably, not glamorously, but you made it. And in the medieval world, that's nothing short of a miracle. The rain eases into a soft drizzle tapping against the thatched roof like a lullaby from the clouds, though you know better than to trust it. Drizzle turns to downpour without warning here, and the roof leaks just enough to remind you that water always wins in the end. As evening settles in, it's time for your least favorite task: pest control. No, not with sprays, traps, or ultrasonic gadgets. Those don't exist yet. Instead, you grab your most reliable medieval tool: a stick. Because rats, mice, and bugs are not occasional annoyances in your home. They are roommates. You shuffle around the edges of your straw mattress, poking the corners, watching as at least one particularly bold rat scurries across the floor like it pays rent. You don't scream, partially because it would scare the livestock more than the pests, and partially because you're saving your energy for more important things, like not freezing to death. The flea problem? Oh, that's unsolvable. You're wearing the solution: your flea collar, a string of herbs, lavender, rosemary, and sometimes wormwood, tied around your neck in a desperate attempt to convince fleas that you are not, in fact, dinner. Historians still debate how effective these herbal repellents actually were. But let's be honest. You already know the answer based on the amount of scratching you've done today. Dinner is mercifully simple. A pot of pottage, the eternal medieval stew, bubbles over the fire. You toss in whatever's on hand: onions, some barley, a carrot that's technically fine if you just cut off the mushy end, and a suspiciously bendy parsnip. Maybe a scrap of salt pork if you're lucky. It simmers, thickens, and develops that comforting "been reheated 3 times this week" flavor. It's not gourmet, but it's warm, filling, and, most importantly, wet. Hydration, medieval style. As you eat, your neighbor's voice drifts over from outside. "Did you hear? They say someone in the next village caught the sweating. Sickness." A shiver runs down your spine. The sweating sickness, fast, lethal, terrifying. Symptoms hit like a cart to the chest: chills, sudden fever, profuse sweating, and death within hours. Some say it's a punishment from God. Others blame bad air or miasma, which, according to medieval science, means don't breathe near anything that smells weird. which, unfortunately, is everything. Historians still argue about what the sweating sickness actually was. Some think a type of hantavirus. Others suspect a mutated flu or a mysterious bacterial infection lost to time. Regardless, you make a mental note to avoid any neighbor who looks slightly clammy. As the fire dies down to embers, you prep your bed. First, fluff the straw, which mostly involves shaking it enough to encourage any resident insects to vacate. Then you pull your single wool blanket over yourself. It smells like damp sheep, because it is damp sheep. The wind rattles the shutters. Somewhere an owl hoots. Somewhere closer a dog barks, then abruptly stops. Curious or ominous. Hard to say. Before sleep, there's one more task. You whisper a brief prayer, part habit, part insurance policy. Something simple like, "Dear Lord, protect me from fire, fever, wolves, highwaymen, falling roofs, bad bread, angry lords, aggressive pigs, and Margaret's cursed rooster." It covers most bases. Then you check the wooden pail beside your bed, your chamber pot. Because when nature calls at 3 a.m., you're not about to trudge through mud, rain, and who knows what else just to use the outhouse. Or if you're like most villagers, a designated corner behind the house. As you lie back, the faint smell of smoke mixes with damp wool and the herbal flea collar pressed against your neck. Your body aches from the endless labor of the day, hauling, grinding, scrubbing, kneading. But there's a strange comfort in the rhythm of it all. Sure, you've got calluses where you didn't even know skin could callus. Sure, your dinner tasted like disappointment with a hint of turnip. But here you are, safe and for the moment, in your little wooden bubble against the wild world. As the fire's last glow fades, your thoughts wander. You think about tomorrow, mending tools, helping with thatching the neighbor's roof, or maybe gathering rushes to lay on the dirt floor to keep the worst of the damp at bay. You think about winter, creeping closer, bringing harsher winds, frozen ground, and the constant question of whether the stored grain will last. You think, briefly, about the lord of the manor, far away in his stone house and with his taxes, his soldiers, and his endless demands. And you think, too, about the tiny joys. Warm bread, a neighbor's joke, a surprisingly sunny afternoon, or the rare moment when a merchant passes through with tales of distant lands. Outside, the rain shifts to a gentle patter. The wind settles. The owl hoots one last time, and slowly, despite the itch of flea bites, despite the faint drip of water onto your forehead from the thatch above, your eyes grow heavy. You survived another day, and in the medieval world, that's a victory worth celebrating. Morning doesn't arrive gently. It stomps in without warning, no alarms, no snooze button, just the sharp clang of a neighbor's rooster who sounds like it regrets every life choice that led it here. Your eyes flutter open to the familiar discomfort of a stiff back, a damp pillow made of straw, and the realization that your foot is suspiciously colder than the rest of your body. Probably slipped out from under the wool blanket during the night. Rookie mistake. The smell hits first. A combination of wet earth, wood smoke, and something faintly barnyard adjacent. Comforting in its own weird rural way. Before you even swing your legs out of bed, you're thinking about food. Not breakfast, in the sense you might be used to. Eggs, pancakes, coffee. No, here breakfast is more like whatever's left over from last night's pottage, or a chunk of dark rye bread that's about 3 days past its peak chewability. You chew it anyway, because calories. As you eat, you glance outside. The village is already moving. Someone's chopping wood. Someone else is herding geese that very much don't want to be herded. Children chase each other, somehow immune, to the mud they're caked in from head to toe. Today's first task? Water. There's no tap, no pipes, no button. Just you, a wooden bucket, and a path down to the stream or communal well. As you walk, you pass the usual landmarks. Margaret yelling at her goat, again, the cobbler trying to fix a shoe that's more whole than leather, and a pair of teenagers absolutely failing at stacking firewood without it collapsing. Filling. The bucket is easy. Carrying it back without spilling half of it down your legs? Less so. Water's heavy. It sloshes. It reminds you with every step that gravity is not your friend. Historians still debate exactly how much time medieval villagers spent just hauling water, but estimates suggest it was several hours a day. And your arms would absolutely agree with that. Once home, it's laundry day, which means heating water over the fire, scrubbing clothes with lye soap made from ashes and animal fat, and then beating them against a flat rock for good measure. The end result? Slightly cleaner clothes that now smell like smoke, soap, and still a little bit like sheep. You hang them to dry, hoping it doesn't rain. Spoiler, it probably will. Then it's on to gardening, or, more accurately, survival. Farming. You weed the small vegetable patch behind the house, checking on the cabbages, the leeks, and that one carrot that's growing sideways but you've grown emotionally attached to. A merchant wagon rattles by in the distance. Excitement. Maybe they've brought salt or cloth or, dare to dream, honey. Something expensive. Something luxurious. You wave but don't expect much. Money's tight. Trade's tighter. As the sun climbs, so does the temperature. You shed your wool outer layer and wipe sweat from your brow, only to remember that there is in fact no deodorant in the 14th century, which explains pretty much everything. Midday brings a break. You sit under the crooked oak at the village's center, chewing on a chunk of cheese so hard it could probably be used as a weapon in an emergency. A few neighbors gather. Talk turns to local gossip. Who's courting whom? Who's angry at whom? Whose pig escaped? Again. Someone mentions a fair coming to the nearby town next week. Music, dancing, strange foods you've never tried. Maybe even a puppet show. Your heart lifts. A fair means a day off. A rare luxury. But first, more work, repairing that section of the fence that collapsed. Fixing a leak in the roof, again. And helping your neighbor gather firewood. Because winter isn't waiting. As evening creeps in, the village slowly winds down. The sheep are herded back. Tools are stored. Fires are lit for warmth and for cooking. You prepare supper, surprise, it's pottage again, and settle onto your usual seat, an uneven log beside the fire. You listen to the crackle of the flames, the distant hoot of the same owl from last night, and the gentle murmur of your neighbors chatting. There's a kind of peace here. Not comfort exactly. Life's too hard for that. But a rhythm, a simplicity. You know what tomorrow holds. The same tasks, the same challenges, the same small victories. Historians often debate whether medieval life was miserable or merely different. Yes, the hardships were real. Disease, hunger, labor, danger. But so were the bonds of community, the joys of a harvest, the laughter shared around fires, the satisfaction of mended fences and freshly baked bread. As night falls again, you crawl back into bed, scratchy wool, straw pillow, flea collar and all. You pull the blanket over your head, shutting out the world. And as the fire fades to embers, the wind hums through the cracks in the walls like a lullaby from the earth itself. You close your eyes. Tomorrow's waiting. But for now, just rest. Hey guys, tonight we begin with something you probably didn't plan on experiencing. Waking up in a freezing, damp hut somewhere in the middle of 14th century Europe. Congratulations. It's not a dream. You live here now. A break, if you're enjoying the story. Don't miss tomorrow's chapter and don't forget to comment tomorrow if this video is helping you. So first of all, no alarm clocks, no phone lighting up, no coffee machine percolating in the kitchen. Your wake-up call is the church bell, a massive iron gong that rings out across the village, shaking you from sleep like a medieval foghorn. You blink your eyes open. It's cold. Not, ooh, let me pull the blanket tighter, cold Mars, but I think I can see my breath cold. That's because there's no insulation. The walls of your one-room home are wooden planks with gaps, wide enough to spot your neighbor's goat through them. Your bed? A pile of straw, loosely wrapped in burlap scattered with twigs, bugs, and maybe a single feather if you're lucky. The smell? Let's call it fermented hay with overtones of livestock and damp wool. You shift under your blanket, which is actually a coarse woolen sack that hasn't seen soap since last harvest. It's heavy, not because it's thick, but because it's absorbed months of sweat, mildew, and chicken-related accidents. Your mattress has settled unevenly, so your spine folds like a travel map and your neck crackles like dried parchment. Around you, the household stirs. Not because anyone wants to wake up, but because privacy hasn't been invented yet. You share this space with your parents, 3 siblings, a cow, and possibly your uncle, who never quite moved out. There's a chicken walking across your chest. You think it belongs to your neighbor. No one knows anymore. Outside, there's the distant sound of a cart and someone shouting about bread. You're still curled into yourself like a damp pretzel, but you know what's coming next. Time to stand up. Your knees protest, your hips pop, and your back lets out a sound that could be mistaken for a door hinge in a horror movie. It's not even dawn, and already you feel like you've lost a wrestling match with a scarecrow. You stretch gently, because any sudden movement might trigger a cramp or dislocate something. You are 21 years old, but by medieval standards, you're halfway through your life. Youth is more of a suggestion than a stage. Your joints think they're 70 and your spine would like a word with management. The air in the room is thick, not with warmth, but with the smell of boiled onions, unwashed bodies, and the faint, ever-present tang of smoke from the central hearth. That hearth has no chimney, by the way. The smoke just drifts up and out, through a hole in the roof. Mostly. On a good day. The floor beneath your feet is cold, packed dirt. And dirt here means mud, straw, and droppings from whatever 4-legged friends walked through the night. You avoid a suspicious puddle. You hope it's just water. You don't ask questions. As you shuffle toward the door, by it more of a wooden flap than a proper door, you pass your family's prized possessions. A single iron cooking pot, a 3-legged stool. 1 comb shared between 5 people. Your little brother is gnawing. On a stick. That might also be breakfast. We'll get there. Historians still debate whether most medieval peasants truly accepted this lifestyle or simply endured it with no alternatives. But either way, comfort was a luxury nobody expected. You didn't sleep for rest and you slept to survive. The hut's one window is just a hole with a rag over it. Sunlight peeks through the weave and you squint. You're alive. That's the good news. The bad news? So are the fleas. You're already scratching at your neck and you haven't even opened the door yet. Oh, and one more thing. There's no toilet. Nature is calling. But not gently. It's yelling. And medieval plumbing is about as advanced as your mattress, so take a deep breath. You've made it through the night. You didn't freeze. You didn't get trampled by the cow. You only swallowed a single bug. Not bad, but don't get too comfortable. This is just the beginning of your very long, very uncomfortable medieval day. And spoiler, it doesn't get easier from here. You push open the wooden flap that passes for a door and step outside. Immediately, your toes sink into something squishy. It could be yesterday's rain. It could be your neighbor's pig's contribution to the local environment. Either way, it's cold, it's moist, and it's now part of your medieval morning routine. The sun is barely up. A thin gray mist clings to the ground like a ghost that overslept. You can hear the clatter of hooves in the distance, a cow braying, a woman shouting something about turnips, and a child already crying. The symphony of peasant life begins before the rooster even gets his act together. You stretch again, because hope springs eternal, and instantly regret it. Your back sounds like an old barn door, and your left knee makes a noise so unnatural you briefly wonder if you've stepped into a different historical era. But no, you're still here. Still peasant, still profoundly uncomfortable. Now it's time to use the bathroom, which in this case is a pit behind the house. There's no privacy, just a few sticks leaning together for moral support. The ground is slick, the smell is biblical, and you try not to make eye contact with the chicken watching you like you're violating a sacred ritual. Toilet paper? No such thing. If you're lucky, someone left a piece of cloth nearby. If you're unlucky, it's been used. Recently. Washing your hands? That's a modern luxury. Here, hygiene is a suggestion, not a practice. Water is valuable, and soap is a rumor. If you're feeling fancy, you might rub your hands with a handful of ashes. Cleanish, kind of, depending on your definition. Now comes breakfast, the most underwhelming meal of the day. You head back inside where your mother is stirring, something that looks suspiciously like yesterday's dinner, repurposed into something thinner and sadder. It's called pottage, a kind of vegetable porridge made with whatever's on hand. On a good day, that includes onions, leeks, and maybe a bean. On a bad day, it includes weeds, turnip tops, and the vague hope of flavor. You scoop some into a wooden bowl and use a spoon that your family carved 3 winters ago. There's a hair in it. You try not to think about it. The texture is somewhere between stew and regret, but it's warm, and it's calories. So you eat. Your siblings argue about who gets the crust of the stale barley bread. You lose. Again. Someone spills their pottage, and it's considered a minor tragedy. That was dinner too. After breakfast, it's time to get to work, because leisure time is for the nobility, and you are emphatically not noble. Your job today is, well, everything. Collect firewood, patch the roof, chase the chickens, scrape mud off the walls, mend your one and only pair of shoes, which are less shoes and more leather suggestions. Historians still debate whether peasants in medieval Europe had anything we'd call free time. Some argue that festivals, feast days, and Sunday church offered breaks. Others point out that survival doesn't clock out. Not when your roof leaks, your goat is sick, and your crop yield determines whether you starve in February. As you step outside with your bundle of chores, you glance toward the manor house. On the hill, it's not a castle, more like a very large house with walls that haven't collapsed yet. That's where the Lord lives. He owns this land. You work it. And in exchange, you get permission to live on it and give him a share of everything you grow. Fair? Not really. But in this world, fairness is as mythical as dragons, and less likely to show up. You walk down the dirt path to the village fields, passing by neighbors, already hard at work. A woman is spinning wool with one hand while scolding a child with the other. A man is hammering something that used to be a wheel and now looks like modern art. You nod to them. They nod back. No one smiles. It's too early for optimism. On your way, you pass the village well. Water here is precious and also suspicious. It's been known to cause stomach troubles, especially after a heavy rain. You remember last month's well incident and shudder. That's why some people prefer beer. Weak ale, brewed at home, is safer than the water. Yes, you start drinking. In the morning, not for fun, but because it's less likely to kill you. A child offers you a piece of bark, you say thank you. It's considered a high compliment, and honestly, it might taste better than breakfast. Your task now is to collect firewood. This involves wandering into the edge of the nearby forest, hoping you don't run into wolves, or worse, tax collectors. You gather sticks, avoiding any branches that look too fresh. Cutting live wood is often forbidden, and getting caught means fines or worse. One guy once lost his goat privileges. You don't even want to know how. The wind picks up, sending a chill down your spine. Your tunic, made from roughly woven linen, does nothing to stop it. Your hands are already cracked, your feet damp, and you've only been outside for an hour. Welcome to the workday. But despite everything, the discomfort, the dirt, the ever-present poultry, there's a strange rhythm to it. A simplicity. You know your tasks, you know your place, you even know what's for dinner. Hint pottage again. Still, you can't help but wonder what it might be like to sleep in a real bed. To have a door that shuts. To not wake up with a duck nibbling your ear. But those thoughts are luxuries. And this life, well, it's yours. For now, at least. You've gathered as much firewood as your aching arms can carry. And your stomach is already grumbling again. Breakfast feels like it happened several lifetimes ago, or at least one full chore cycle back. But before you can think about eating, it's time to join the others in the fields. Because food doesn't grow itself. And even if it did, the Lord would still take half of it. The village. Field is a patchwork of narrow strips, long rectangles divided among the families who work the land. It's part of the open field system, which sounds charming until you realize it means you share everything, from tools to blisters to crop failures. You head toward your family's allotted strip, nodding to the other peasants already bent over rows of parsnips like they've misplaced their last hope. You grab a hoe, wooden, splintery, probably older than you, and begin hacking at the soil. The ground is stiff from the morning chill, and every strike of the hoe feels like an insult to your spine. You've done this every day since you were strong enough to hold a tool, and you'll keep doing it until your body decides it's had enough. Retirement isn't a thing. People don't retire, they just kind of stop. The work is mindless, which means your mind wanders. You start to notice things. The sound of birds in the trees, the faint aroma of manure that never quite leaves the air, and the way your fingers have gone numb even though it's almost spring. A younger boy next to you sneezes into his sleeve, then keeps digging. Germs, hygiene. These aren't medieval concerns. Everyone's sharing everything, from plows to plagues. Speaking of plagues, you remember the tale your aunt told about the village 3 hills over. Rats, fevers, a priest who tried to exorcise the well. Historians still debate whether every outbreak was really the bubonic plague or just the flu on medieval hard mode. Either way, it doesn't end well. You grip your hoe a little tighter and keep working. Lunch, when it finally arrives, is not so much a break as a brief, edible pause. You sit on a patch of dry grass, unwrap a cloth bundle, and reveal more bread. Coarse, brown, and dense enough to be legally classified as a building material. It crumbles slightly when you bite it, and you quickly brush away the dirt like that's going to make a difference. If you're lucky, there's a sliver of cheese. Sharp, a bit moldy but full of flavor. You savor it like it's a delicacy, which by your standards it is. Cheese doesn't happen every day. It's like a dairy comet, rare, mysterious, and potentially awe-inspiring. Someone nearby pulls out an onion and bites into it like an apple. You nod in approval. Raw onion. Breath is the cologne of the working class. And water. Again, risky. You take a cautious sip of small beer from a leather pouch. It's warm, flat, and tastes like regret. But at least you won't be doubled over later wondering if the well cursed you. You stretch your back, which cracks in protest, and lie back for a moment. The sky above is an endless pale blue canvas. For a second, you imagine life as a bird, soaring far above the mud and manure and manorial obligations. But then someone yells that the oxen have broken the plow again, and you remember, you are decidedly not a bird. Afternoons in the fields are long. The sun climbs slowly, heating the ground until the mud dries into a cracked, crumbly surface that somehow still clings to your ankles like it has abandonment issues. You hoe, you rake, you mutter to yourself about the tragic state of your socks, if you even have socks. Every so often, you glance at the manor house again. The Lord probably isn't even awake yet, or he's enjoying a light breakfast of 6 kinds of meat and imported wine, deciding whether to go hunting or just yell at someone for fun. The class divide isn't just economic, it's existential. You're not just in a different tax bracket, you're in a different reality. As you work, a traveling peddler passes by on the road, pulling a cart full of knickknacks, colored ribbons, shiny beads, even tiny mirrors. Everyone stops to look, not because anyone can buy anything, but because the sight of color, of novelty, feels like a revelation. You dream briefly of owning a blue ribbon, just one, to tie around your wrist or your hair or anything at all. But a ribbon costs more than your week's bread. So you look, and you let it go. You return to your strip, now slightly less full of weeds, and dig until the sun begins to dip. The light softens, turning everything gold and dusty. Your arms ache. Your feet are soaked with sweat and whatever else is in the soil. You are absolutely exhausted, but at least the field looks like it's been conquered. For today, historians still argue whether medieval peasants were truly miserable, or if the simplicity of their lifestyle offered some kind of balance. Maybe it depends on the peasant. Maybe it depends on the weather. Maybe it depends on how many onions you've got left. Either way, your day is far from over, because once the fieldwork ends, domestic duties begin. But for now, you walk back toward home, your bundle of sticks slung over your shoulder, your legs trembling slightly with each step. And as you approach the hut, you can already smell it, that unique aroma of boiling root vegetables and desperation. Dinner's almost ready. You step back into your hut, or more accurately, your one-room universe of family, smoke, and noise. The first thing that hits you isn't the sight of your loved ones gathered around the fire. It's the smell. The stew pot is bubbling, and while your stomach lurches with hunger, your nose hesitates. The scent is earthy. And by earthy, we mean it smells like someone tried to make soup out of a garden they yanked straight from the ground. Bugs and all. Tonight's dinner is pottage, the great equalizer of medieval cuisine. Imagine a thick beige sludge made of barley, turnips, old cabbage, and a handful of beans if you're lucky. Meat? Only if someone's chicken mysteriously expired, and no one asks too many questions, but you're too tired and too hungry to care. You grab a wooden spoon, dip it into the pot, and blow gently before taking a bite. It's warm, it's vaguely edible, and it's the closest thing to comfort you'll have today. Your family eats in silence. Words are saved for when they're needed, like arguing over chores or whose turn it is to sleep closest to the drafty door. The baby cries. Your uncle snores even while awake. Someone accidentally drops their spoon into the pottage and just fishes it out with bare hands like it's a perfectly reasonable solution. No one reacts. Dinner is eaten straight from the pot. Plates are a luxury, bowls a mild fantasy, and the firewood you dragged back earlier is already down to embers because green wood burns like wet paper. You stare into the flames anyway, letting your mind drift just a bit. The light flickers against the wooden beams overhead, and the smoke curls lazily toward the roof. There's no chimney, just a hole, a generous concept in a home with a thatch, roof, and precisely zero airflow. Your eyes sting, but again, no one reacts. In medieval homes, watery eyes are just the norm. It's like the house is constantly low-key gaslighting you. Eventually, the pot is scraped clean, even the burnt bits at the bottom. You lick your spoon and wipe your mouth on your sleeve, because napkins, like most things, haven't been invented yet. The fire dies down, and someone mutters that it's time to check on the animals. You groan, because of course, you're on animal duty tonight. You step outside, into the cold evening air, and make your way to the pen behind the hut. 2 pigs, 1 goat, and 3 chickens that have an attitude problem. You check their food trough, mutter encouragement to the goat, who looks like it might be plotting your demise, and gather the eggs, one of which is suspiciously warm and squishy. You set that one aside just in case. The stars are bright tonight. No light pollution, just the faint glow of the moon and the flickering candlelight leaking from various huts. You look up, and for a moment, the world feels enormous, but also oddly close. There's a strange comfort in knowing that while your life is brutally hard, it's also shared by almost everyone you know. Back inside, the nightly rituals begin. You wipe down your feet, or try to, using a cloth that's more whole than fabric. Then you crawl into the corner of the room claimed by your family's bed, a pile of hay stuffed into a crude frame, draped with a scratchy wool blanket that smells like old soup and wet sheep. You lie down, curling your limbs to conserve heat, because the fire's out and the wind is already seeping through the gaps in the walls. Someone's feet are in your face. You gently push them aside. They return like clockwork. It's a silent nightly war that no one ever wins. Above you, the thatch ceiling creaks and something small scurries across a beam. A mouse or a squirrel or a rat, maybe all 3. You try not to think about it, it's easier that way. And then, in the quiet, a question crosses your mind. What if you'd been born a noble, a rich merchant, a monk, someone with real shoes? Historians still debate how aware medieval peasants were of social mobility, or the total lack thereof. Some argue they dreamed of better lives. Others believe they accepted their lot with a sort of grim fatalism. Either way, you're too tired to debate. Your eyes flutter, your limbs ache, but you're not asleep yet. A coughing fit erupts from the other side of the room. The baby starts crying again. Someone lets out a particularly offensive form of digestion and just groans instead of apologizing. You close your eyes and wish for the 1000th time for silence. It never comes. Privacy is non-existent. You live Eat, sleep, and breathe with at least 7 other people in a room smaller than most modern studio apartments. Every sound is shared. Every smell is shared. Every sigh, every scratch, every sneeze is part of your daily soundtrack. And yet somehow, this is home. Tomorrow will be the same. Fields, pottage, smoke, livestock, and more aching limbs. There's no weekend, no holidays unless it's a religious feast day. And even then, it's just more church and less work, unless you're cooking. You drift closer to sleep, letting your breathing slow, your thoughts scatter. Your last conscious image is of the goat outside, still watching, always watching. The morning doesn't so much arrive as it ambushes you. Before your eyes even open, you're greeted by a draft of icy air seeping in from the crooked door. Someone stirs beside you. Someone else coughs directly into your ear. The goat, yes, and that same goat, bleats loudly from outside, like it's taking roll call. You groan and stretch, but your body disagrees with the motion. Your back pops like an old floorboard and your knees ache in protest. You're 23 now, which means you've officially survived longer than most peasants you know. Congratulations. You're elderly. Breakfast is not a thing, at least not in the way you're imagining. There's no hot coffee, no pastries, no smoothie bowls with names like Sunrise Bliss. Instead, there might be a crust of rye bread so tough it could double as a weapon. If you're lucky, a bit of ale to wash it down. Yes, ale, because water isn't exactly safe to drink unless you're a fan of surprise dysentery. You tear off a piece of bread with effort, chew slowly, and wince. One of your molars sends a jolt of pain straight into your skull. Dental hygiene is, to put it mildly, not a thing. Brushing your teeth with a twig and salt is the best you can hope for. Your breath smells like last night's pottage and this morning's despair. Once outside, your breath fogs in the cold air. You trudge toward the fields, your feet sinking into the mud with every step. The shoes on your feet, if you're even wearing shoes, are more holes than leather, held together by prayer and pig fat. You pass the same faces every morning. Your neighbors, wrapped in cloaks that look like they were stitched together by blindfolded squirrels, nodding sleepily, already resigned to the day. And so it begins. Again, the endless rhythm of fieldwork. The sun isn't fully up, but you're already ankle-deep in the same muddy furrow as yesterday. You swing your hoe with mechanical repetition, turning over soil that has seen generations of hands, blood, and rain. You pause for a moment and look up. The village priest walks past, hands folded, murmuring a prayer. He has shoes, real ones, and a woolen robe that's still mostly robe. You wonder, not for the first time, if you should have tried the monastery route. But you can't read. That's a problem. Literacy is a luxury reserved for nobles, clergy, and a few lucky scribes. For you, your entire vocabulary exists in calluses, coughs, and cursing turnips. Still, there's a quiet rhythm to the work. The sun creeps up. Birds chirp overhead. Your fellow peasants joke quietly, their laughter muffled by the wind. A neighbor slips in the mud, curses creatively, and somehow ends up with more dignity than when he was standing. It's these moments, the strange solidarity of shared struggle, that keep you going. You take a short break and sip from your wooden flask. The ale is warm and flat, but it's something. Your stomach growls, reminding you that one chunk of bread doesn't count as breakfast. You fish a shriveled apple from your pocket, take a bite, and immediately regret it. It's mostly worm. You eat around it anyway. A noble rides past in the distance on a horse so majestic it looks painted by angels. He's flanked by guards, draped in furs and surrounded by silence, the kind that only money can buy. His gaze doesn't even touch the fields. To him, you might as well be part of the dirt. You watch him ride off toward his stone manor, which probably has chairs, with backs, and maybe even cushions. Historians still debate whether peasants envied the nobility or simply didn't care. Some argue the rigid social structure was so deeply ingrained that upward mobility was inconceivable, like a pig dreaming of a crown. Others believe resentment simmered quietly, passed down like family heirlooms. You're too busy digging turnips to ponder revolution. Hours pass. Your arms ache. Your feet feel like bags of wet flour. And your back? Well, your back has filed an official complaint. Finally, a bell rings from the village and it's noon. Time for a short break or dinner, which confusingly refers to lunch. You sit in the shade, or what counts as shade. A low stone wall and a bush that may or may not be poisonous. You eat whatever you have. Maybe more bread, a bit of cheese if you're incredibly fortunate, or a hunk of salted fish that smells like regret. Flies gather. You wave them off half-heartedly. Someone nearby is talking about a neighbor who died last night. Fever, or witchcraft, or just exhaustion. No one knows. No one really questions it. You remember hearing that the life expectancy in your era is around 35. But that average is skewed by infant mortality. If you make it past 5 years old, you've got a fighting chance to see 50, assuming you don't fall into a well, eat bad berries, or accidentally insult a noble's goat. The break ends. Back to the fields. More digging, more aching, more mud. It's endless but weirdly hypnotic. Your mind wanders. You think about seasons, about winter when the fields freeze and everything slows, about spring, when the mud returns with vengeance, about feast days, your only real holidays, when you get to wear your second-best tunic and maybe dance awkwardly to the sound of someone banging spoons together. Eventually, the sun starts to dip. Your shadow stretches long over the earth. The workday ends not with a whistle or a clock, but with sheer physical collapse. You drag yourself back home, shoes squelching, shoulders slumped, stomach growling louder than before. At the door of your hut, you pause. You've survived another day. You're covered in dirt, sweat, and probably a little goat hair. Your hands are cracked, your face is sunburned, and your soul is somewhere near your ankles. And still, you're here. Home. Sweet. Barn. Or at least, that's what it smells like. A familiar blend of smoke, livestock, mildew, and whatever. Your cousin tracked in from the pig pen. You duck under the low wooden frame of the doorway, careful not to knock your forehead on the warped beam that's knocked out at least 2 teeth over the years. Inside, the same scene greets you. Dim firelight flickering off soot-covered walls, a low haze of smoke hanging lazily in the air, and every living thing, two-legged or otherwise, squabbling over the same 3 square meters of space. You collapse onto your sleeping pile. Not a bed. Beds are for monks and nobility. Yours is more of a mound of straw that hasn't seen daylight since the last plague. You shift slightly and hear a crunch that definitely wasn't hay. Probably something alive. You decide not to investigate. Dinner is already underway, which is to say someone's stirring a pot over the fire and everyone else is trying not to breathe in the fumes. Tonight's delicacy? Pottage, again. Pottage is the medieval version of a one-pot meal. Grains, roots, the occasional wilted vegetable, and anything that didn't run away fast enough this morning. It's thick, grayish-brown, and tastes faintly of something. Possibly regret. You scoop your portion into a rough wooden bowl and settle onto a corner of the floor. The spoon is splintery, the stew is lukewarm. But at least it's food. You eat in silence while a toddler cries and your uncle tells the same story about the time he saw a witch on the hill who turned his cow cross-eyed. No one listens, but he tells it anyway. After dinner, the atmosphere softens just slightly. Bellies are semi-full. The fire crackles. The baby finally stops crying. Someone strums a lute with 3 strings and questionable tuning. You lean back, and for the first time all day, your body rests. It's not comfortable, but it's familiar. You pick at a scab on your arm. You're not sure what caused it, but it's been there a while. Hygiene, again, isn't a high priority. Baths are rare, not because people hate cleanliness, but because heating that much water is a full-day task and the concept of hot running water is a fantasy even nobles can barely afford. You bathe maybe once a month with everyone else in the river. In winter, that becomes a near spiritual test of survival. Your clothes, meanwhile, haven't been washed in. Well, memory doesn't go back that far. They're mostly wool, patched. So many times you're unsure which part is original fabric. Everything smells of smoke. Everything itches. Laundry? like personal space and breakfast, is a modern luxury. As the night deepens, someone lights a rushlight, basically a stick, dipped in animal fat. It gives just enough light to remind you of how many cobwebs share your ceiling. The smoke curls toward the thatch and mixes with the other fine aromas of medieval life. Feet, goats, onions. Before long, talk turns to tomorrow. There's murmuring about the weather, always a risk to your livelihood. Will the frost come? Early this year? Will it destroy the barley? And what about the rumors of wolves? Someone claims they heard howling near the forest. Someone else says it was just a drunk merchant trying to sing. Outside, the world is black. There are no street lamps, no neon signs, no buzzing phone screens. Just deep, ancient darkness, the kind that swallows you whole. You peer out the tiny hole in the wall, calling it a window is generous, and spot the moon, low and yellow like a tired eye. Somewhere far off, an owl hoots. Closer by, something rustles in the thatch. You're reminded that sleep here isn't guaranteed. Peace. Rats scurry across the floor. Fleas jump from blanket to blanket. Your neighbor's snoring sounds like a dying accordion. And there's always the possibility, slim but present, that bandits, illness, or some freak accident will make this your last night in 1325. Still, there's comfort in the routine. A strange, weary comfort. The predictability of it all. Wake, work, eat, sleep, repeat. It's not freedom, not by modern standards, but it's survival. And in the Middle Ages, that's the only real goal. You lie back, head resting on a burlap sack full of straw and hope. Your family settles in around you, a jumble of limbs, wheezing breaths, and shared body heat. No privacy, but plenty of warmth. The fire pops one last time before fading into glowing embers. Your eyes grow heavy. You think about how different life could be if you'd been born a noble, or a monk, or a merchant with shoes. But would it be better? Maybe. Would it be safer? Probably. But would it be less itchy? Absolutely. Historians still argue over whether medieval peasants were truly miserable, or whether their acceptance of suffering made life more bearable. Was joy just different then? Smaller, simpler, closer to the bone? A warm bowl of stew. A dry place to sleep. A day without feudal taxes. Maybe that was enough. You roll over and tuck your scratchy blanket around your shoulders. It smells like everything. Smoke, sheep, earth, and centuries of dreams too tired to be chased. The wind howls gently outside. You hear it rattle the doorframe like a lullaby in wolfskin. Sleep doesn't come quickly, but it comes. Tomorrow, you'll do it all again. And the next day. And maybe the next. But for now, there's rest. Morning comes not with sunlight or gentle alarm tones, but with a screaming rooster that sounds like it's auditioning for a medieval horror film. Your eyes open to the familiar aroma of damp wool, stale breath, and the unmistakable scent of something decomposing very slowly somewhere nearby. Good morning, 1325. You stretch, but not too enthusiastically. Your joints crack, your neck protests, and the cold air immediately seeps into every uncovered patch of skin. The fire has long since gone out, and your blanket, stiff with last week's rain and years of use, offers the warmth of a damp napkin. Still, it's morning, and that means one thing: chores. Again. You slip on your shoes, if you can call them. That leather scrap stitched together with what might be horsehair and optimism. They offer all the support of a wet leaf, and they're already damp. Of course, socks aren't really a thing unless you're wealthy, so it's just your feet, the shoes, and whatever muck the livestock left overnight. First chore? The latrine. You grab the communal night pot, a misnamed horror, and carry it to the waste pit out back. This daily ritual is part sanitation, part existential crisis. One slip, and you're not just humiliated, you're at risk of disease. Cholera, dysentery, things that sound like they should be rare boss fights but are very real and very unpleasant. Historians still debate whether communal waste systems made things better or worse in tight medieval villages. But you don't need a degree to know it stinks. Back inside, breakfast awaits. And by awaits, we mean it's yesterday's. Pottage thinned with rainwater and maybe a hint of turnip. You eat while swatting flies and trying not to look at the spider inching along your bowl's rim. Protein, you tell yourself. Bonus nutrition. Then it's out the door, off to labor. Today's task, hauling water from the stream, several hundred meters away. You balance 2 wooden buckets on a yoke, the kind that digs deep into your collarbones and leaves bruises that last until next week. The walk is long, the mud is deeper than you thought, and the stream, icy. Every drop spilled is a little failure, one that means a longer trip or less water for cooking, cleaning, and surviving. You pass neighbors along the way, all equally bent over, gray from age or fatigue or just smoke stains. Conversation is brief, a grunt, a nod, a muttered joke about the weather, which is either too wet or too dry and never just right. One man insists this will be a bad harvest. Another says it'll be worse than last year, which is impressive because last year nearly killed half the village. When you finally return, you're soaked, sore, and freezing. But there's no time to dwell. There's weaving to do, mending, gathering, mucking, or helping repair the fence the pigs broke through again last night. The pigs are the smartest ones here. They know freedom when they smell it. Later in the day, something unusual happens. A traveling merchant rolls into town with a creaky cart and a donkey that looks like it regrets every life choice it's ever made. He opens a cloth bundle and offers wares no one can afford. Tin trinkets, dull knives, dried herbs that smell like despair. You stare anyway. Just seeing something different, something that didn't grow out of your soil, is a thrill. The merchant speaks of distant cities, places with brick roads and buildings taller than 2 stories. He's probably exaggerating. You hope he isn't. The idea that somewhere out there life might be better, warmer, safer. It sticks in your mind like a song you can't shake. Your day ends as it always does. Muscles aching, hands cracked, and stomach vaguely full. But tonight there's a bonus. A local festival, a saint's day. You're not exactly sure which saint or what he did, but any excuse for music and slightly burnt bread is good enough. At the village center, a small fire burns. Someone produces a flute with only 5 notes. Children chase each other. Adults drink something fermented and questionably legal. You dance, or rather, you shuffle rhythmically around the fire. Your feet hurt, your back hurts, but for a few brief moments, laughter replaces coughing, and smiles outnumber complaints. You remember that crocodile dung sunscreen joke? Somehow tonight's drink tastes like it was made from something similar. Still, no one cares. Because, for tonight there's celebration. No lords, no taxes, no famine, just song, soot, and sweet ignorance. The stars come out. The fire dwindles. People trickle away back to their dark, creaky homes. You follow suit, shoes squelching, cloak heavy with smoke. Back in bed, if you can call it that, you sigh, one day at a time. You wonder what life would be like if you lived in the future. In a world with medicine that works and roofs that don't leak and toilets that flush without offending every sense. A world where people sleep on clouds and eat food that doesn't resemble boiled disappointment. Historians still debate whether the Middle Ages were really as grim as we paint them, or if modern minds just can't fathom a life so raw and immediate. But as you curl up on your scratchy mat, surrounded by snores and shadows, one thing is clear. You're still here. And that in this century is a victory. The fire's glow has long since faded, and your village is now cloaked in heavy quiet. But even in darkness, life continues. Somewhere beyond your hut's crooked door, an owl hoots, a fox yelps, and the wind gently nudges loose shutters like a lazy ghost. But you're still awake. Your muscles scream for rest, yet your mind stays busy, replaying the day, counting, chores ahead, wondering whether your stomach will settle or if that fresh turnip stew was plotting a slow rebellion. You toss gently, careful not to wake the 5 other bodies packed in beside you. There's no privacy in your world, no closing your bedroom door and pretending the world doesn't exist, just shared breath, a shared blanket, and the occasional sharp elbow jab from your cousin who insists on sleeping sideways. A baby cries. A dog barks. Somewhere down the path, a cartwheel creaks in the night. You wonder what merchant could possibly be traveling at this hour. Then remember, it's not a merchant. It's probably the neighbor's ox having a midnight identity crisis again. Still, sleep won't come just yet, so you think about what your life could be, should be, might have been. You heard a monk once say that the soul chooses its life before birth. If that's true, you'd really like to speak to the manager. You stare at the rafters overhead. They're sagging, possibly alive. A spider lowers itself delicately from a beam, suspended like a living punctuation mark. You try not to think about where it'll end up. Hopefully not your mouth. Around you, someone snores like they're training for a medieval woodwind ensemble. It's both impressive and deeply unfair. You reach for the corner of the blanket, pull it closer, and try again to sleep. Eventually, morning does come again. You wake with a headache and a neck cramp that feels permanent. The rooster is mercifully late today, but that doesn't stop. The bustle outside, feet in gravel, sheep braying, and the dull clank of something breaking that shouldn't be breaking. Probably the well crank. Again. You sigh. Again. But something's different today. A royal messenger is in the village square. He's on horseback, which already makes him the most glamorous man within 100 miles. His boots are polished, his scroll is sealed, and his expression suggests he hasn't smiled since his christening. Everyone gathers. Children whisper. A dog barks at the horse's legs like it's auditioning for a joust. The man unrolls the scroll and reads in a flat voice that could bore paint off a wall. A new tax. For defense, they say. Against a threat no one's seen but everyone's expected to fear. The villagers grumble. You feel the familiar sting of helplessness. Nothing you do, no matter how hard or honest, can stop these constant demands. Harvests get smaller. Pockets get lighter. And now, one more slice of your life handed over to someone in a castle you'll never see. Historians still debate whether medieval taxes were fair or just a way to fund increasingly elaborate hat collections. All you know is, they never asked first. After the messenger departs, horse clomping like a boss fight with hooves, the mood turns sour. Arguments break out. Someone blames the local priest. Someone else blames the pigs. You blame the weather. It's safer that way. You return home, your stomach empty again. Lunch is a piece of bread so stale it could double as roofing material, and a thin soup that tastes mostly of boiled ambition. You choke, it down with practiced misery, and get back to work. Afternoon passes slowly. You gather firewood. You scrub your only tunic in cold water. You step in something. You regret stepping in something. As evening nears, a visitor arrives, a wandering friar. He carries news, stories, and, more importantly, dried figs. You listen to his tales. A king's war in a land you've never heard of. A saint who reportedly glowed like a lantern. A monastery that brews beer so good even God forgives them for it. You nod, smile, and marvel at the idea of such places. Then he tells you about scholars, men who live in rooms with books where warmth and knowledge go hand in hand, where ink replaces mud, and the hardest labor is thinking too hard about philosophy. It sounds absurd. It sounds wonderful. You ask if someone like you could ever become a scholar. He pauses, smiles, and changes the subject. Evening falls, again. Back in your hut, the air is thick with smoke, breath, and the creak of old wood. Your feet hurt. Your eyes sting. But for once, there's a strange comfort in it all. This is life. Not a glamorous one, not an easy one, but yours still. You lie down, head against straw, and pull the scratchy blanket to your chin. And, finally, slowly, sleep begins to visit. Your breath slows. Your mind softens. The noise fades. And your body, sore and sorely underfed, begins to surrender, to darkness, to quiet, to rest. Now let's soften things a bit. Wind down, 300 words. The night wraps around your village like a heavy wool cloak, coarse, yes, but warm enough. The fire's glow has long since faded to gentle embers, and even the wind seems to hush its voice, respecting your body's need to finally, blissfully, let go. You sink deeper into the straw bedding, no longer noticing the scratchy fabric or uneven floor. They're part of your world now, familiar and oddly soothing. Each creak of the rafters, each distant bleat from the goats, they fade into a rhythm. Your body knows well. Your heartbeat slows. Your thoughts begin to drift, no longer tied to fields or chores or taxes or strange men with scrolls. Just the soft, slow dance of memory and dream. Maybe you imagine that monastery, the one with books and warmth, or the city of stone towers and candle-lit halls. Or perhaps you're somewhere entirely your own, beneath a tree, beside a river, where the sun finally stays a little longer. No more hauling water, no more damp shoes, no more rooster alarms or firewood splinters, just breath, just stillness. You are safe, you are held. And tomorrow, well, it can wait. Tonight is yours. Let sleep take you gently. Let the world blur and soften. Let the dream come. You're already there.